Well, welcome to this workshop on managing digital resilience. My name's Deb Leary. I'm President of the Greater Birmingham Chamber and also CEO of Forensic Pathways and Clarify I. Today's webinar will explore how leaders and managers of businesses across the Greater Birmingham region can approach fostering digital resilience by developing their staff and utilising best practice and expert advice. This session is part of the Chamber's Growth Through People campaign. The GBCC Growth Through People campaign aims to help local firms boost productivity and grow through improved leadership and people management skills. This year it involves three events and webinars, along with thought leadership blogs and podcasts throughout March. The campaign will end with a conference on the 30th of March, which isn't far away, which will feature a mixture of inspirational keynotes, thought-provoking panel discussions and practical workshops from individuals, including Ian Reid, Chief Executive of the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games, Carl George, MBE, MD of the Governance Forum, and Dr. Justin Varney, Director of Public Health at Birmingham City Council, and Yoyundi Donaya, at Travers and Hamlins and Chair of the WMCA Race Equality Task Force. So we've got a packed agenda for this March. I'd like to thank all of our headline sponsors and partners for their support, and that includes Aston University, Birmingham City Council, Southern City College Birmingham, West Midlands Combined Authority. And I'd also like to thank our speakers today, Lee Johnson, Chief Technology Officer, and Claire Wise, Head of Talent from Air IT, for giving their time and sharing their experiences today. I'm sure they've got a lot of knowledge to impart. I'll mention it now and at the end of today's session, so if you can please complete our post-event survey, it will be hugely appreciated. And this isn't just for event feedback. It will contribute to our research into leadership and people management in the region and our policy work with local and national stakeholders on this very agenda. It will also inform what the Growth Through People campaign looks like going forward, so that we ensure that we deliver what you want. And so join us on social media using the hashtag GTP22. I hope you enjoyed this session and take away some ideas to implement in your own businesses. And I'm now going to hand over to Claire and Lee for this workshop. And after that, we're going to have a Q&A. So please put your questions, any questions you have, into the Q&A function throughout the session, and I'll pick them up at 11:15. Okay, over to you, Claire and Lee.
Thanks, Deborah. Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Claire Wise from Air IT, as Deborah said. I'm the head of talent at Air IT. I've been with the business now for 6 months. My background is human resources, learning and development, talent management, and I've worked predominantly in the engineering field throughout my whole career. I've worked in civil engineering, construction, infrastructure, manufacturing, automotive engineering, obviously now more recently Air IT and technology. A lot of my work over the last 10-15 years has been in management development, so supporting leaders, managers, people managers to be the best that they can possibly be when leading and managing teams. Lee, do you mind popping to the next slide for me?
I think my bit's first, I think.
Oh.
That's okay, no
Sorry,
worries.
Lee, you go.
That's okay. That's okay, no worries. So hopefully, can everybody see my screen okay? Perfect,
yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah.
So first of all, hi everybody, and really sort of hope you're all well. I think first of all, I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you all today, and also thank you for taking the times out of your days to join our webinar, where we're going to tell you a bit more about cybersecurity risks and really how to manage that sort of cybersecurity through digital resilience and people. And one of the things that I'm going to start off is I'm just going to do a brief introduction to myself, and then what we'll do is we'll move forward and then get into some of the content. Now, what I'd really like to provide you with really during the session today is that I want to start off by giving you some background on the increased risks, especially now we're working remotely. But more importantly, once we've been through some of these, I'd like you to be able to leave this session with some key takeaways to potentially implement in your own organisations to ensure that, I guess, really that you're as secure as you can be during this period and beyond. So My name's Lee Johnson, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Security Officer here at AirIT, and also head up our Specialist Information and Cyber Security division called AirSec. I've worked in IT for coming up to 17 years this August, with 10 years in the MSP and security sector. And one of my passions is really to help businesses to achieve their goals and ultimately transform their businesses through the use of technology. And also through AirIT in the East Midlands Chamber, I'm also the resident consultant for cyber security, Office 365 and cloud computing for the European Union Digital Growth Programme. And this is where I provide seminars and workshops to business owners to show them how they can be using technology smarter within their businesses. So in terms of what we're going to discuss today in my session, so first of all, I'm going to give you some background to really the current state of cybersecurity, or the threat landscape as we also call it. And this should give us some useful context to give you some background on what types of attacks that we're seeing have the most success. And unfortunately, it is still largely I suppose also in a positive light though, it is largely the unsophisticated and often non-targeted attacks that we're seeing have the most success. The good news though, however, is that the vast majority of these attacks can actually be largely prevented by implementing some simple but effective controls within the business. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on today. And then after that, we are going to discuss why the threat is heightened by the current situation in terms of the result of COVID-19, and how many organisations were ultimately forced to operate. And it's also meant that the businesses that didn't invest ahead of time to have the right technology in place to sufficiently support remote working, they have unintentionally brought some significant security risks to their organisations, the ones that weren't prepared. So we're going to talk about how technology really helps that today as well, and also discuss some of the key reasons as to why this is happening. And then what we're going to do, we're then going to talk about what steps that we can take within our organisations, particularly around the human and that people element, to make sure that we're as geared up to be as protected as possible against these common types of threats. So I think it would be useful if we start off with some background on the current cybersecurity threat landscape, as we call it. And cyber attacks are on the rise year on year, and unfortunately it shows no signs of slowing down, as we all know. I mean, just if we look at last year to combat this, the UK government and the National Cybersecurity Centre invested 1.9 billion into cybersecurity until the end of 2021 through the NCSC. So one of the things that's really important is that SMEs are often the primary target for a few reasons, but primarily this is often due to the lack of investment and systems in place to sufficiently protect the organisation, especially when we also throw into the mix that we've now got that we're now tasked with an entire workforce operating remotely or often in a hybrid manner. And there are many reasons for the rise in attacks, but to cover some of the most common factors facing us today, I mean, first of all, we've got this now shift to hybrid working, which has resulted in some organisations, again, that haven't put the right technologies in. It has sometimes meant that we've now got increased access to our corporate resources from previously unknown devices. And many organisations are now utilising their systems in such a way that may have not been planned in the original architecture design of the systems. And this can also present us with a significant security risk if things aren't done properly. And there's been these low-level attacks that we talk about, and these unsophisticated attacks, they often take advantage of poorly implemented security controls. So, for example, ineffective password policies, known software bugs and flaws and vulnerabilities that aren't patched. And to this day, still one of the most common findings that we see post-breach are often related to unpatched and out-of-date software as well. I mean, one really good example of this would be that 2017 WannaCry attack that took down the NHS and many other organisations, because the patch to protect that, to actually protect against that specific attack, was actually available 2 months prior to the event. So this is just another reason why frameworks such as Cyber Essentials and similar services are so critical, because under that framework, it means that we install security patches within 14 days of release, which means that we're protected against these kinds of attacks in a much stronger way. And other methods that we see that the attackers are using within the report are often, exploiting normal human traits such as trust in order to try and gain unauthorized access to accounts or business systems. And the outcome of these attacks vary, but often results in compromise of the business email systems or the delivery of malware. So I wanted to talk a bit about phishing. So some of you may or may not have heard of phishing before, but phishing is the attempt to obtain sensitive information. And really, information such as usernames, passwords, credit cards, and all those kind of things. And it's usually delivered via email. And this will then redirect the victim to a fictitious web page that looks almost identical to the real thing. And therefore giving, it normally ends up in users giving away their credentials. And really, one of the things that we do find is that criminals, being the sort of opportunists that they are, they will commonly use current trends or themes to increase their chance of the recipient opening and falling for the attack as well. And for example, one of the trends that we're seeing at the moment are phishing attacks related still to COVID-19, which if we think now, especially with people looking to return to the office, even 2-3 days a week, what we find is that many people will want to open that email to find out more about how much longer they're going to be able to continue to work from home. And I suppose really the key message here is that the criminals will use these situations to their advantage, and the stats show that it is highly effective. Now, I want to take you on the journey of a common cyber attack. And what happens is once the cyber criminals have obtained these users' credentials via various methods, such as phishing that we spoke about on the previous slide, what we find is that once those attackers have carried out their own illicit acts, they'll then often sell those credentials on the dark web. Now, the dark web is basically an underground marketplace where malicious organizations can sell users sensitive information such as usernames and passwords and more for a fee. And typically you'd find high targets could be worth more. So for example, CFO, CEO, CTO, they're often high value targets that can result in a lot more control over the organization. So they would typically sell for a higher fee. And again, such an unsophisticated method such as phishing can result in potentially unlimited rewards for the attackers, including access to all of your emails, your corporate intellectual property, but also more concerningly, your client data as well. And this is a perfect example of what I mentioned before about, we're finding now that the attackers are actually coming through the door with the front key. And what I mean by that is that the reason that they're coming through the front door with the key is that when they go through these phishing exercises, they are actually obtaining the username and password. So the challenge is that when the cyber criminals try and log into the system, they're going to be logging in first time successfully. So it becomes very difficult as cybersecurity defenders to try and protect against that. And that's why it's so important to make sure that we're not using single factor authentication anywhere within our environments. One of the things that we also find is that users always commonly use or often commonly use the same password or a variation of the same password across multiple systems, line of business applications, etc., and also in their personal lives as well. And this area of the dark web that we spoke about, it's actually one of the fastest growing industries in the world. And basically the idea is that criminals can log on to here, and as you can see, it's a little bit like an online marketplace, but with some very different categories. I mean, you can see some of the categories on the screen there, but effectively you can log on, you go to try and download some passwords, and what you can see here, I mean, if we see here 5 million hacked and harvested Hotmail addresses for $500, or someone's, citizen, passport, credit card numbers, usernames and passwords for $25. And this is what we talk about when we say that the risk to reward ratio from these people doing this is that they only have to spend a small amount. The risk is very low, but actually the potential outcome and the risk is so vast. And this is why it's so important to make sure that we've got the right security controls in place. So I want to talk to you about impersonation and social engineering as well, which specifically targets the employees themselves and not necessarily the IT systems directly. And you may hear attacks called things like impersonation, CEO fraud, or whaling. And basically social engineering is where attackers try and trick our users to do the wrong things, such as disclosing information, clicking a malicious link. And phishing can be conducted via text message, social media, or by phone. But to be honest, these days, the vast majority of the time, people use the term phishing to describe attacks that arrive by email. Now, email is an ideal delivery method for phishing attacks because it can reach users directly. It can hide among the huge number of genuine emails that busy users receive day to day. And what we find is that in a targeted campaign, an attacker may often also use information about employees of the organization to try and make their messages even more persuasive and realistic. And this is referred to as a tactic called spearfishing. And one of the reasons that we say this is that we shouldn't be fooled by personalization or anything that the organization has been undertaking. We've all got company social media accounts, we've got blogs, we've got socials. So it only takes 5 or 10 minutes for somebody to spend some time having a look through on LinkedIn at who works with the CFO, who works with the CTO. Okay, what events has that company been doing previously? Have we been doing any charity events? And all of a sudden, what we find is that the criminals just spend 5 minutes doing a bit of background work through open source intelligence. They then put that information into the body of the email, and all of a sudden, unfortunately, that builds on that human element of trust that we spoke about before, which means that the sort of net result can be that their attack is significantly more successful, because straight away people can find themselves disarmed by that natural friendly approach. You know, they know a lot about the organization. And typically, if we talk about impersonation, which is where we pretend to send an email from somebody at the organization, what we can often see is that somebody will just register a completely random email address. So it could be xyz@gmail.com, or in other ways it can be, you know, let's say, for example, Air IT, we might get somebody that registers Air IT with 2 R's in there. So again, a busy user can often miss these kind of things. And what we'll find is that they might set their display name as Lee Johnson from Air IT, but it could be a completely random email address. And effectively what they would often do is they would send an email to someone at, you know, within the organization to say, hi, I need this stuff doing today. I need this invoice paying. It's got to be done today. They might mention something that they've seen on the company blog. And the idea is people are so busy that often they won't notice that. So it really is, you know, it really is important that people, our people and our employees often don't see themselves as part of the organization's information and cybersecurity effort. Now, people, it's a bit of a strange one, really, because people often, well, always have the capability to either be the strongest or the weakest link in our security defenses. And no matter how much that we spend, even the best firewalls that exist cannot prevent an employee from falling for a phishing email. You know, your company could spend millions on state-of-the-art security software using automation, machine learning, advanced threat intelligence, but none of this will really matter if your employees are not properly trained on how to spot and respond to common attacks. And it's really much easier for hackers to spend 5 minutes creating a convincing spear phishing email that appears to be from your boss than to spend, you know, months researching zero-day vulnerabilities. And like most criminals, hackers are often looking for the biggest score that requires the least amount of effort. And one of the things also is that, unfortunately, the vast majority of employees are actually aware of the risks of clicking on suspicious links in emails, but actually click on them anyway. But even worse, what we find is only a very small percentage of people usually actually admit to clicking on the suspicious link through fear of being penalized, or in some cases even sacked. And this, in our opinion, is actually a big part of the issue, because organizations should implement a cybersecurity culture and build that within the business. And what we mean by that is something where we are actually welcoming our staff to report if they've noticed something that doesn't seem right, or if they've clicked a link that they think might now be malicious, or even worse, have they provided their personal details or username and password into a successful phishing attack. Organizations are always better to be aware, so we can respond in the right manner to give us a better chance of mitigating that threat ahead of time before it becomes an issue. And security awareness training is something that we should be doing for all of our staff at our organizations to make sure that we are empowering our people to be successful in this new way of working, and making sure that they are our first and last line of defense. And when we're talking about security awareness training, this is basically an ongoing education process that helps to educate our employees about cybersecurity, IT best practices, and also potentially some like regulatory compliance frameworks that some organizations may fall under. And what we also do, as well as carrying out the user awareness training, we also pair this with something called phishing simulations. And this is effectively where we take the time to create carefully crafted phishing emails that might look like a Microsoft 365 login, a Salesforce or CRM login, or again, if people take the time to research what partner organizations that companies work with, they will often then send phishing emails that look like it's from that partner organization. But what we can do is that we can effectively, create a carefully crafted phishing email that's actually sent from us as the cybersecurity business to almost try and, to really try and test your users. And what we end up with is we end up with with some reporting that says, right, we've had 97% of emails successfully sent to your users, 27% of your users actually open the email. Well, 8% of them click the link, but actually out of those 8%, 2 of them actually click the link and they put their username and password in. So if we take an organization size of 10 people, then it only take 2%. That's ultimately two people have put their username and password into that system, which then means that we have to assume at that point that our organizations can be compromised. So that brings me to the end of my slides, but what I wanted to briefly do is just I wanted to give you a quick preview just of what we mean by the security awareness training and sort of what this can look like. So if you can let me know, I'm just going to move my browser screen onto the window. If you could just let me know by nodding your head on the camera, Claire, whether you can you can see the browser screen. Mm-hmm. So what we see here is that you will, and what we're seeing here is we are seeing what we'd see as an end user. So we're seeing here that we've been assigned these campaigns, and typically we recommend that we do this quarterly. You can do these videos as often as you like, but we do find that if we go down to doing this on a monthly basis, you actually get less engagement. It becomes a pain for people. So we recommend that we spend the time and do some quality training once a quarter, and also doing a minimum of 4 phishing exercises per year as well. So what this does is this will show you your personal risk score, and this will depend on how many training campaigns that you've done, how you succeeded in them. And the idea is that your users in your organization will go through these training programs, and it will provide you with a report of, these users clicked the link, these users actually failed the test at the end of the training. And the idea is it gives you an idea of the employees in your organization that are typically a higher risk of resulting in sort of business email compromise, or ultimately a compromise of the organization. So what we can do here, if we go over to training, we can have a look at some, we've got advice on how to create a secure password. We've got a training program on CEO fraud that we spoke about earlier that's then got a quiz at the end. We've got phishing attacks. So I'm just going to give you an example and just launch this just so you can see what it looks like. And effectively we would go through it. It would ask you various questions, but actually before we do this, it would go through and show you some video content so that you can train your staff first. And the idea is that at the end of that program, they would effectively then be trained on that method. They would be asked a set of questions. And, after that point, the idea is then we go through the reporting. And one of the things that we find is that when we typically run these phishing campaigns or user awareness training programs, we typically run a phishing campaign right before we start any training. And what we'll find there on the reports is we will get what we call the phishing baseline score for the organization. And typically we would see this, often as high as 25% of people that actually click the link, and actually sometimes actually put their data into the email. But what we do find is certainly by quarter 4, by the time that we've ran 3 or 4 of these training campaigns, already we're building that culture within the organization. We're seeing engagement in the offices where people are calling their colleagues over to their monitor. Do you think this could be a test? Are we trying to be caught out? What do you think to this? And although that may sound like a bit of a gimmick, actually even that in itself, compared to when you start doing this, it just shows that it's building that culture within the organization. And one of the things that's really good about this as well is that the quality of the videos.
Online communication is fast, simple, and not without risk. Every year, attacks by cyber criminals cause economic losses running into the millions. And they're becoming ever more professional, such as with this kind of phishing attack, the CEO fraud. An email from a superior or member of the board orders the transfer of a large sum of money to a foreign bank account. As discreetly and quickly as possible, or they might miss out on a very important business opportunity. The sender, signature, and content appear completely authentic. But, in fact, it's a clever piece of cyber criminality. Some indicators can help to uncover fraudulent emails, such as when the requested transaction is accompanied with an urgent pressure and a demand for secrecy. Check to see if the bank account really belongs to the company, and whether the email signature differs from your firm's standard template. The presence of unusual wording or spelling errors can also be signs of a forgery. When replying to the email, Check to see if a different reply to address suddenly appears. If there is any doubt of the authenticity of the request, the matter must be discussed with superiors or colleagues. The same applies for unusual phone calls that may be part of preparation for this kind of fraudulent activity. Diligence is always more important than speed.
So I just wanted to give you that sort of very quick example there, and this is one of the very simple and actually one of the most easy sort of training programs. But I wanted to show you one of the short ones, because even something like that can put our users in a much better position. But what we find is there's so much different content that we can provide as part of this user awareness training as well. And effectively, what I mean by that, we've got some that are sort of very professional. We've got some that include things like gamification. So it actually involves you doing a quiz, or there's another one called Spot the Fish, which is more like a game. But then actually we've got some really in-depth sort of 15 half an hour minute videos that are actually done almost like a Netflix type series. So there really is, and again, it all depends on whether your users and what their training style is like. But I guess the key message here is that there is so much content that we can provide to our users. We can make this fun, we can get the engagement, and ultimately what that results in from a cybersecurity standpoint, it means that we've got an enabled workforce that we're putting in a position where they are enabled to succeed, and ultimately goes back to really building that cybersecurity culture that we spoke about previously as well. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I want to thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful for you. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Claire Wise, who's going to talk to you about the people management and what we can do from a talent and people point of view during this new way of working. So Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Lee. Yes, so apologies. Obviously, did my intro and completely jumped over Lee earlier. So yeah, I was on one of them. But obviously, I've kind of done my introduction. But for those of you that might have been late joining, I'm the head of talent here at RIT. I've been with the business now 6 months. My career has been human resources, talent management, learning and development in engineering across automotive, civil engineering, and now obviously technology. So that's a little bit about me. So in terms of today and what we'll cover, Lee, if you don't mind, jump into the next slide. Thank you. This is just some of the things I want to look at with you today in terms of setting the boundaries, actually using technology as an enabler within our teams, switching off, disconnecting, turning off, and our roles as leader managers in the business with technology and the emerging world that we're in with technology. So the boundaries, looking at the boundaries, as employers, are we responsible for helping our people switch off from their work, and is actually technology to blame for some of the sort of 24/7 working that we're seeing? And the boundaries often between work and our non-working lives have become much more permeable than ever before, with little guidance on actually how to disconnect from work and go into home, particularly over the last couple of years with the pandemic and us working predominantly from home, being able to disconnect. It's proving really quite clear actually that it's very difficult for individuals to switch off. There was a recent UK survey where 4,000 adults were surveyed, and 55% of that survey population indicated that they are struggling to turn off their emails and continued still to check them even when they've finished their working hours. And the Chartered Institute of Management also corroborate this with 59% of line managers, people leaders saying that they're not switching off, which is ultimately leading to added sort of stress, pressure, and anxiety. We've also got the sort of digital natives, the younger generation coming through as well. They are very, very reliant on technology to manage their lives, to socialize, to connect, and that obviously leads to that sort of compulsion with technology. And it's being aware that can actually impact your sleep patterns and your well-being. I'm sure many of you have heard that when we get into bed at night, we should leave technology out of the room and away, because it can actually disrupt our sleep patterns. So learning how to manage the impact of technology on our lives is becoming increasingly important. It gives us the ability to network, to connect. It offers so much to us, but it is important that we disconnect from those phones, those tablets, those laptops. And I'll look a little bit more into switching off later. But to manage this, we need to think about our well-being, develop strategies to cope. And ultimately, this is called digital resilience from a people perspective. So the enabler. So technology is absolutely an enabler. And if you actually look at the definition of enabler is helping make something possible. And that's absolutely what technology does for us. It's enhancing our working lives. It's helping us to connect all the time and give us that flexibility to work from different locations while on the move. And that brings huge benefits to employers and employees. I know particularly for us and at Air IT and in previous industries, actually this even opens up talent pools geographically for us. We're able to recruit nationally and not just regionally, and that with the shortages, the skills demand that there is, and it's very much a candidate driven market out there at the moment, that opens that pool for us with connectivity and technology. It gives us the capability to not do the standard 9 till 5, to be able to work outside of normal working hours. And actually productivity can be increased through this. But again, going back to what I said earlier, we also need to be mindful that if we are not doing the standard, that we are still giving ourselves that time to disconnect. Some of the disadvantages of technology being the enabler is that we are allowing ourselves to overwork sometimes. Our approach here at at Air IT, with technology as the enabler, obviously we're a technology and communications business, so we're leading and want to lead in this field, but Microsoft Teams, particularly through the pandemic, has been a huge enabler for us. And actually what we've done in all of our hubs, all of our offices across, sort of nationally, is we've got Microsoft Teams technology in our meeting rooms to support that connectivity. Our meeting rooms are enabled through MS Teams. And I know for myself, my team is spread geographically. We're not all in the same location, in the same office. But if people are in the office and people are working at home, Teams has enabled us to stay connected and run our meetings without any sort of delay or impact by not being together in person, which I'm sure many of you have experienced in the last couple of years. It's important, though, that we still protect time to meet face to face. That is good for our health and our well-being. But I think we're just reassessing now, is that car journey, is that time, do we need to travel 2 hours to have an hour meeting? It's just weighing up the value add in meeting face to face, but there's absolutely still value in that. So yes, very much the enabler. Switching off, so as I said to you earlier, switching off is key, and disconnecting. I'm sure many of you have seen increases to your working week in terms of hours. Now, some of us aren't having so much of a commute. Actually, we're not switching off at 5:30 because we know that we've got that journey home that might take us 45 minutes, an hour, actually, and then just carrying on, and we need to reinstall those disciplines so that we are switching off, disconnecting, and work and health and manage equally effectively and obviously sustainably, and realizing that focusing on other aspects of our lives, our well-being, our relationships, and actually just being present. Sometimes when you are not disconnecting at home appropriately and properly, still checking the emails on the phone, etc., you aren't being present, and it's it's important that you do, as I said, for your well-being, and if you've got families and things like that. There's other things. It's striking that balance. So digital resilience is really about the ability to manage technology so that our work and our health outcomes are equally managed effectively. It means that we can continue working in a flexible manner, but at the same time realise when it comes to switching off and focusing on other elements. When we look at a simplistic definition of switching off, it means stop giving attention to something or somebody. So by switching off, we really need to focus our attentions on something else. And in the case of technology, it's making sure that we do that. And as line managers, we can really lead by example. And as people managers and leaders in our fields, we can really, sort of walk the talk and lead by example in doing that when leading and managing teams. So that leads me nicely onto our role as leaders and managers. We have a really important influence and role in ensuring that our teams and our people don't sink into large workloads, particularly while we are adopting this new hybrid sort of model where we are moving predominantly from face-to-face to that sort of balanced approach. And actually some organisations are finding that really difficult to reduce the workflow, cutting off the emails. Actually, in some cases, in some countries, they're even practicing things like, deleting emails during holiday periods. If you're not there, they're not going to be responded and they're deleted, and they're only responded to the new emails from day one, returning back to the office. It's kind of a shame that we've reached that point in some parts, in some organisations, and that's actually where we're not seeing the advantages of technology, because it should be making our work more flexible. It's important that we have strategies and interventions really at 3 levels to support our people, support ourselves, support line managers, and ultimately support the businesses that we work within. And if all of these levels aren't reached, then it's unlikely that we'll be able to make change, we're unable to be successful. We have a clear role to play. As I illustrated and discussed earlier, if we're not switching off ourselves, our teams will see that and be led by that influence. If they see us sending emails at 9-10 o'clock at night, they'll see that. And if we're not sending emails between sort of after sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock, then we're setting that disconnect tone. Also, there's capability now with things like Outlook, for example, that you can time your emails. So if you are going to send an email at 9 o'clock at night, time it so that it comes in the next morning at 9 o'clock, 8:30. There's tools available to stop that. And if you are choosing to send something later. I think when working at home or working remotely, workers can become more visible and invisible. A conversation I actually had with a HR colleague in my network yesterday was people, this sort of compulsion that the green light is always on, whereas if you are in the office, that green light does go off because you go and make yourself a coffee. You're having conversations in the office with people. Do you worry about it when you're in the office, when like sometimes people do when they are at home? So it's just thinking logically and sort of mechanisms to coping mechanisms to make that realistic. When it comes to our teams and interventions, as I said, working at 3 levels. Actually, when working with your teams, just because we are, I say invisible, but not working as face to face, that we are still scheduling time to have conversations with our team members one-to-one, checking that their workload is manageable and that pressure points are supported and they're supported through difficult periods, and having those conversations and they know that they can reach out to you. And that's very much about building a relationship with your team, and sort of the foundations of anything successful are obviously those relationships that are formed. Helping our teams to identify and manage their sort of e-competence. So linking back as well to what Lee was talking to you about earlier this morning, that they are competent and confident when dealing with their technology. to manage that working from home and disconnecting, and setting a good example for the business, ensuring that emails aren't sent outside of working hours and so on. We are working in a really agile way now, hybrid working, agile working. And agile, if you actually look at a definition of agile is about working within guidelines but without boundaries. And sometimes that working from home, you lose those boundaries of that disconnector from departing from the office and heading off and so on. So it's being aware of that. So then finally, there was, I don't know if any of you have heard of Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek is, very sort of inspirational kind of leader and speaker. And one of his recent sort of quotes was, "Without action, we only have words." And that really resonated with me, particularly when it comes to digital resilience and much of the topics we've spoken about this morning in terms of doing what we say we will do, and as leaders and managers doing that, if we are asking our teams to take time out and disconnect, that we are seen to do that as well, because if we don't do it, it is only words. And we have to be mindful that in the workplace, we need to lead with authenticity and acknowledge the existence of burnout. If we respect other people's time as much as our own, we can set a really good example, encourage our teams to take care of each other, and encourage all of our sort of companions and colleagues to take care of themselves. Burnout is a physical or a mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. And as I said to you a moment ago, linking to that relationship bit, that your teams feel able to talk to you if they are feeling overworked, feeling that they're unable to manage, that we're objectively having those conversations with them around what the priorities are to support them with that overwork or that stress, so that they are managing their well-being too. So I think that's it from me. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, over to Deborah. I believe you're going to facilitate some questions for us.
Absolutely. If you could take your slides down, that would be helpful, and then I can get to see if we've got any questions coming in. I think it's interesting, isn't it? The whole series is called Growth Through People, and it's not called that for nothing, because every element of what you've talked about is all about human. Mm-hmm. It's not just about tech. And if it was just about the tech, we'd all get the right tech and job would be done. But it's that human factor. And as humans, we are predictable and unpredictable all at the same time. I'm never surprised with what happens with people. And so from a technical point of, from a cyber point of view, being tooled up isn't enough. It's definitely about engaging with your employees, getting them to understand that they are the ultimate barrier to what could potentially be quite an impactful an event for a company should they have a cyber breach. So it's getting that across, and I think I'm sure you'll have a similar perspective and perhaps more. I feel quite sorry for companies at the moment, particularly in the SME community, but I do feel sorry for businesses at the moment, because they just want to get on. They just want to sell their stuff. They know their products, they know their services, and all of a sudden they've got this spectre of cyber totally out of their understanding. And so for you guys, and for me, my business as well, because we've come from similar industries, it's all about inspiring that confidence in them to know that they can, what they need to do is to take reasonable steps. So how do we instill that level of confidence in them? How do we get them to have that culture where it's okay to make a mistake, but we've got to work towards trying to avoid it where we can?
I think it's all about that piece that I spoke about during my presentation, in that we have to, and this either fortunately or fortunately has to come down from the top, because you have to have a CEO, exec and leadership team that are bought into cybersecurity. They understand the importance, because actually what we find is that, I mentioned it on one of my slides, the people in the executive team are actually often the top targets as well. And also, often if they are the ones that are impersonated, for example, they're often the ones that are going to have the most chance of success. So it's really, really important that as the leaders of an organization, you buy it, you understand the risk of cybersecurity, and cybersecurity should be on the agenda. There should be a cyber representation on the board, in the executive team. It should be part of day-to-day operations, so we can build things like security by design. But it all goes back to that key message of making sure that we are, number one, putting our people in a position where they are enabled to be able to protect the organization. It's no good just roasting somebody over hot coals because they've clicked a malicious link, but actually, have you taken as a leader of that organization, have you invested in cybersecurity? Have you put them in an environment where they're able to be successful? Are you testing them? Are you enabling them to know what to spot? Because you touched on it a minute ago, Deborah. People that work at organisations that aren't technology and cybersecurity businesses, they are experts in their field. They're not experts in cybersecurity, and therefore you can't expect them to be. But that's where it comes about working with a partner organisation, investing in cybersecurity training so that your people can be your first and last line of defence. And again, building that culture where you are welcoming people. If they have made a mistake, put their hand up so you can get involved, sort it out. And to give you an example, if somebody does put their username and password into a phishing email, yes, you can't wind back time, but what you can do is that if you know about that ahead of time, you can, number one, most simply change your username and password. But secondly, what you can do is you can take certain steps to render that data no longer useful, i.e. changing that password where it's used anywhere else. So I think really it just comes back to that piece that you mentioned, really building that culture within the business.
Yeah,
And culturally, just adding to that, sorry, Deborah, is that we are creating environments where our teams feel safe to be open and honest, and that yes, mistakes are made, but we learn from mistakes. And going back to what Lee said, that culturally that it's a safe space to learn, and that you're not going to be scolded for getting something wrong, but we're providing the knowledge and the experience and the development so that that they can learn. So yeah, absolutely. Culturally is, for me, really passionate about, it's a safe space and we'll learn together, and that you're supported to learn and supported to learn from making mistakes too.
Absolutely. And there's a stat came out by IBM. It's a couple of years old, but it's not reduced that much. That it's usually somewhere around 280 days before a company is aware that they've had a cyber breach. Correct, and so the sooner that you can get evidence or become aware that you may have had a cyber breach as a result of an issue with somebody clicking on a link, whatever it may be, the better it is. And obviously as well, on the dark web side, there is so much being sold on the dark web, but if anybody was to go on the dark web without understanding, you will only see a small section of what's being sold. A lot is being sold behind marketplaces and forums. So it's getting to that point in your company where you are instilling that confidence. I think is really important. I think you've explained that really well. So that's fantastic. And also, you're talking about executive impersonation. The executives need to understand that even if they're not on social media, their family member may be. Correct. So they may be posting stuff about, oh, Mike, happy birthday, let's go out and do this. And all of a sudden, that, you're getting to understand a bit of profile. There'll be pictures of family on Facebook, all sorts of stuff that sometimes we're not aware of. So that the executive impersonation piece is really important. We've had a question come in for Claire, actually. Somebody has said that after the last few years, burnout is a bigger concern than ever for many organisations. Are we heading toward bans and restrictions on emails out of hours or deleting emails during holidays? How does this work with flexible working and people working at non-traditional times to suit their lives?
Yeah, so it's a really valid point, and I think we're all on a bit of a journey and a learning curve with that as organisations in this kind of new world at the moment. We have hybrid working, we have flexible working, and it's actually how do all of those align and connect and work together. I think the biggest thing for me and sort of my approach is it's how you're working that together as a team. You know, who is available at what point to answer and support if somebody else isn't. You know, if somebody else is offline, then actually what's the next stop in terms of expertise and knowledge to support that. So if something can't be answered because that's actually not within the hours that somebody else is working, then how is that being managed so that somebody else can respond or can answer? So it's that kind of collaboration and that team working and that connecting, and that each other is covered to support each other when somebody is online or offline. And actually, if somebody is struggling, and then, you know, there's often very clear signs that somebody is starting to struggle there, you know, maybe deadlines are being missed, they're distracted, things aren't going in, that you're stepping in quite quickly to sort of support and prioritize with that workload and what can be changed to supports to sort of reset the bar and focus. You know, too much can come our way sometimes. And, you know, as leaders, managers, we need to help our teams manage that. And even ourselves, you know, who's supporting us when, you know, when, you know, if we're the, you know, the leaders within the organization and we are taking on this responsibility for our teams, but actually working with each other as well as an exec and a senior leadership team to support each other is important. And it's that transparency and that openness and that honesty. And it goes back to relationships for me.
Absolutely, it's a communication piece again, isn't it? It's all that. It's all about how you communicate and that collaboration. So totally get that. I mean, I bet there's a few people on this webinar, and I'm in forensics, so I'll probably know who you are, who are doing all the things that we shouldn't do, and I'm guilty as well of going onto my email before I go to bed. On my email, I open my eyes.
It becomes a habit, doesn't it? It becomes a reflex. You know, you open your phone and you automatically open up Outlook or just by default and scroll down to see what you've got.
We've had a question actually, and Lee, you might be able to help with this one. I might be asking a silly question, but is it okay for people to have their work email on their personal devices? I was also thinking about this from a GDPR point of view. Yeah, technically able to answer that from a GDPR perspective, Lee.
Yeah, no problem. So it's a really good question, by the way. And one of the things that you'll often see now in the working world is you may see an acronym that says BYOD, which is bring your own device. So it is now actually quite common ground for people to not want to carry two phones. I mean, we've got a BYOD policy at Air IT, for example. If people want to access corporate email on their phone, then we will provide them with a mobile device. However, where we've also got people that say, look, I've got my own device that I want to use, but I want to access email. The view that we've got is, yes, that's okay. However, one of the things that you have to do is you have to make sure that you've got the right technology in place. And the type of technology that we're talking about is called mobile device management, or MDM for short. And what that effectively does is it enables you to set a certain amount of controls on that device. So, for example, you may say, right, well, actually, yes, you can have work emails on your device. However, I'm going to enforce that phone is encrypted. I'm going to enforce that phone must have a passcode. And actually, what you can do is that you can separate the phone into two areas. One area of the phone is their personal phone. You can't see or control any of that. But what you could also do is you can almost split the phone into two and create what's called a corporate container. And then you can present your corporate applications like Teams, Outlook, email, etc. through that corporate container. What that does, it strikes a balance between us as a you know, from a security standpoint, we make sure that we can control that area of the phone, but it also strikes a balance from the personal point of view that we don't have control over the personal side of their phone. We can't see any messages, we can't do anything to that personal segment, but it gives us that security control that we know that we've enforced the passcode. But what it enables us to do, let's say if that member of staff was to either leave the organization, it was a disgruntled member of staff, or actually more commonly, if they lose that device, what it gives us the capability to do is say we can wipe the data from that corporate container, and that then again strikes that balance that we spoke about between allowing the user to use their own phone, not having to have multiple devices, but it means that we can do it in a secure way. And that also helps from a GDPR perspective as well, because you can, you know, because you can enforce things like a passcode, etc. It means that you've not been negligent. You know, you've taken the time to put security controls in place so that if somebody does find that phone, or if that phone's lost, well, actually they're going to need to get through that. They're going to need to get through that passcode to get into the phone. And one of the security controls that we also recommend is that if you enter your passcode wrong 5 or 10 times, that it actually wipes the data from that phone as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Lee. Well, we're coming up to the last 4 minutes, so I've got a few thank yous to give out. Firstly to you, Lee and Claire, thanks so much for being on the call. You know, the amount of information you've given and advice has been outstanding in such a short space of time. We could spend a whole day on this area. Really could.
Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing what we managed to get through. So a massive thank you to both of you for joining us and sharing your insights. Thank you for all of you who've attended the session today on managing digital resilience. Again, I'd like to thank our headline partners and sponsors for your support: Aston University, Birmingham City Council, Southern City College Birmingham, and the West Midlands Combined Authority. Now, we've got 2 more events coming up during the rest of the Growth Through People campaign. And these include Navigating Conversations about Mental Health and Wellbeing, a practical workshop style event in Birmingham on the 24th of March, led by Diana Vance. She's an associate at Work Horizons, and Daria Flanagan from Thrive at Work who is the Thrive at Work Engagement Manager at West Midlands Combined Authority. And of course, we've got our Growth Through People conference on the 30th of March, which will be featuring Cole George, Dr. Justin Varney, and our keynote speakers Ian Reid, Chief Executive of Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games, and Yutundi Danya, Partner at Trowers and Hamlin and Chair of the WMCA Race Equality Task Force. Details of all these upcoming events, Growth Through People events, are available on the Chamber website. And can I just remind you, if you could please complete our post-webinar survey so that we know what you want and so we can deliver it. That would be fantastic. Thank you again. I hope you've all enjoyed the session, and we'll take away some great ideas to implement in your own business. So thank you to everybody who's taken part today.